For years, they had operated with an air of untouchable arrogance. The Mexican cartels, once a network of drug traffickers, had become something far more dangerous. They built armored vehicles that locals called monstruos. They employed high-tech drones for surveillance and assassination, and their arsenals boasted military-grade weapons, from .50 caliber sniper rifles to rocket-propelled grenades. They were so confident in their power, so assured of their impunity, that they had become accustomed to open combat with the Mexican army and federal police. But this overconfidence, this belief that they could act as a sovereign power, was about to lead them to a fatal error. On a searing Thursday morning, deep within the sun-baked dust bowls of Sonora, a convoy of cartel SUVs tore across the landscape, their tires kicking up a massive plume of dust. Inside the lead vehicle, a lieutenant known as El Zorro smiled, a scowl of triumph etched into his face. They were running a shipment of over 500 kilos of pure fentanyl, a payload worth more than the GDP of some small nations. Their intelligence had warned them that U.S. Border Patrol was in the area, but their convoy was heavily armed and their plan was simple: outrun them or outgun them. But what they didn't anticipate was the sudden guttural roar of a U.S. Army UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, a dark shape against the impossibly blue sky, closing fast. The helicopter wasn't just observing. Its primary mission was to support a ground team, but its presence was enough to confirm a pursuit. From the cartel vehicles, machine guns began to chatter, a frantic, desperate attempt to ward off the ghost in the sky. It was a futile gesture, as the Black Hawk's thick skin was designed to withstand much more than small arms fire. The helicopter, a symbol of American military might, was armed with crew-served M240 machine guns on both sides. Its pilots, a pair of seasoned combat veterans, tracked the convoy with a detached, clinical efficiency. As the distance closed, El Zorro saw a chance. He grabbed an RPG-7 launcher from the back of his vehicle. The RPG-7, a Soviet-era weapon, has become a common sight in the cartel's arsenal, a brutal and effective tool for their street-level conflicts. For El Zorro, this was the ultimate test of their power, to strike a symbol of the very country they were feeding with poison. He braced the weapon against his shoulder, took aim, and fired. A streak of white smoke shot from the launcher, followed by the distinctive whoosh of the rocket as it screamed towards the Black Hawk. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The cartel members watched in a collective breath, their bravado hanging on the success of this single desperate act. But the rocket missed, veering slightly to the left, a fraction of a second off its mark. A ripple of nervous energy ran through the convoy. They had failed. And in that moment, the Black Hawk's aircrew, having just been fired upon by an RPG, no longer saw a criminal organization. They saw an act of war. The rules of engagement had changed. The cartel had just tested the U.S. military, and the price they were about to pay would be immeasurably higher than they could have ever imagined. The moment that RPG shots sailed past the Black Hawk, a new conflict began. The radio chatter, which had been a calm stream of tactical updates, instantly shifted. The aircrew of the UH-60 reported the hostile fire, and within seconds, the order was given. The U.S. military's response was not one of anger, but of cold, strategic precision. Above them, unseen and unheard until it was too late, a hunter appeared. This was an AH-64 Apache attack helicopter, and its purpose was simple: a lethal escalation to match the cartel's brazen aggression. The Apache is not a transport vehicle. It is a flying weapons platform, a symbol of concentrated destructive power. Its armament is a symphony of destruction. Mounted beneath its nose, a new 230 chain gun fires 30mm high explosive rounds at a blistering 625 shots per minute. Beneath its stub wings, it carries a mix of Hellfire missiles, each designed to destroy armored vehicles from miles away, and Hydra 70 rocket pods. The cartel's monstruos, their makeshift armored trucks, which had proven so effective against local police, were about to meet a force they were never designed to face. The Apache's pilots, locked onto the cartel convoy, did not need to get close. They opened fire with the M230 chain gun, a torrent of hot metal that chewed into the desert floor, sending plumes of sand and rock into the air just ahead of the lead SUV. It wasn't a warning shot, it was a precise, calculated act designed to stop the convoy without a single round of small arms fire returning. The rounds tore through the cartel's vehicle, shredding the tires and engine block, rendering it useless. Another burst of fire hit the second vehicle, and then the third, disabling the entire column in a matter of seconds. As the vehicles lay motionless in the dust, the Apache's pilot had one final confirmation to make. The pilots were authorized to use air-to-ground missiles. This was not a pursuit anymore, it was a punishment. From one of the Apache's wings, a Hellfire missile launched, a silent, graceful streak of fire that shot across the sky. The Hellfire, a laser-guided missile, is designed to find its target with unerring accuracy. It slammed into the lead Cartel SUV with a deafening explosion, vaporizing the vehicle and everything in its immediate vicinity. Another Hellfire struck a second vehicle with the same devastating result. The explosions were not just to kill, but to send a message. This was the difference between a street fight and a military engagement. This was the strategic flaw in the cartel's overconfidence. Their armaments and their so-called armored vehicles were effective against law enforcement, who were bound by strict rules and limited firepower. But in testing the US military, they had crossed a line. The US military operates under a different set of rules with different objectives. The cartel's primitive anti-armor defenses were no match for the Hellfire missile. Their reliance on brute force was useless against a flying fortress that could destroy them from a distance. The cartel had stepped onto a battlefield they had no hope of winning. They had tested an enemy with the most sophisticated technology and the deadliest firepower on the planet. And for that mistake, they had just paid a truly fatal price. While the battle in the desert was over in a matter of minutes, the diplomatic shockwave that followed would last for months. The Mexican government, already facing its own public opinion crisis regarding the cartels, was now in an impossible position. On one hand, the US had just demonstrated a level of military precision and firepower that the Mexican state could only dream of. The message was clear: the US was no longer a bystander. On the other hand, Mexico's sovereignty had been challenged. The official narrative would be that the US military had violated Mexican airspace and territory, a deep insult to national pride and a political minefield for any sitting government. The event risked reopening old wounds and reigniting historical grievances, like the territorial conflicts of the 19th century, potentially destabilizing the entire region. The US government, for its part, would publicly call the action a defensive strike against a clear and present danger to American lives. The White House would release a statement outlining the cartel's act of war in using military-grade weapons against US personnel. This was all public theater. The real message was sent in the flames and smoke of the desert. The US had laid out a new set of rules in a language the cartels understood: overwhelming force. The cartel's strategic flaw was not just their firepower, it was their failure to understand that they were operating on a different battlefield. Against local police and even the Mexican army, their armored trucks and RPGs were a terrifying and effective deterrent. They were fighting a low-tech, asymmetric war, but in firing upon a US military helicopter, they had just elevated the conflict to a high-tech, full-spectrum engagement, a war they could not possibly win. This was a final warning. The US military now had a new doctrine. Any criminal organization that used military-grade weapons on a scale that threatened US personnel or interests would be treated not as a law enforcement problem, but as an enemy combatant. The rules of engagement were no longer defined by legal precedents or political nuance, but by immediate and devastating retaliation. This was a new era in the war on drugs, where the lines between a criminal enterprise and a hostile military force had completely blurred. The cartel had spent years building a criminal empire, but in one arrogant act, they had brought the full weight of the world's most powerful military down on their heads. They had tested the US, and the price was their entire operation. We'll see you in the next video.